I feel like you guys can do a lot better on Lilia and Belveth and GM plus games. A thing to remember is I'm not going to say they're perfectly balanced. Maybe they do need some adjustments. But our goal is not to make every character perfectly, beautifully, flawlessly balanced everywhere. There are going to be characters that are OP in silver, like BRIAR as an example, and GAREN and Warwick. And there are going to be or Yorick. And there are going to be characters that are OP in Grandmaster, like potentially Belveth and Lilia. Now, sorry, and I should qualify that with this. There is a difference between OP, must be nerfed, and very strong. Now, and it is okay if there are certain characters that are very strong for Grandmaster players, and it's often not desirable to nerf them just because they're very strong in one place. Now, if they're OP and completely oppressive and need big nerfs, then like, we should probably do that. But just kind of noting that like, it is okay if some characters are a little strong. Have you seen Katarina build with AERY, Scorch, and Liandry's? Well, you have to remember that we nerfed all the runes to basically be as good as AERY, as long as you can apply AERY repeatedly. Like, AERY is actually, I would argue, probably superior to a lot of runes if you can apply it repeatedly. Because it has the same ratio as everything else, right? So it doesn't scale as well as everything else because of the base damage, but it's close. Whereas previously, AERY was just in terms of damage, it had a much worse ratio. Now it has the same ratio as all the other runes. So I wouldn't be surprised if a character like Kat is running AERY if her plan is to just poke you repeatedly in lane, is what I would say. Is that what the dev team wants? Do you think if Katarina's damage comes from her daggers more, it would be less incentive for Kat players to go to a burst build when it's easy to dodge passive daggers? I mean, what else is Kat going to do in lane? Right? Like, I think it's totally reasonable that in lane, Katarina would want her daggers to do something, right? Because without those daggers, the only thing Kat does is literally one-shot you, right? I'm being a little hyperbolic. Like, a really good Kat player can probably, get in or get out, but at the end of the day, that character, without the ability to throw a dagger at you every once in a while, becomes very one-note. So I think it's pretty reasonable that, especially during the laning phase, that Katarina, to like make her lane work, would spec into the daggers, like hurting you, especially post durability update. Because remember, it used to be that like jumping on someone was much more likely to kill them because everybody started out with way less health. And that's just no longer the case. It's way harder to kill people early in the game now because they're so tanky from level 1. And so I think that was a change that probably made it a lot harder for a character like Kat to function, right? And so I think it's cool that she has like other ways she can adapt to the laning phase, since it doesn't seem like we really want like many characters to just build like all in you, say at level 4 or 5, and kill you, right? So I think that's a totally reasonable thing if a Katarina player is trying in the laning phase to get more of a poke build going on. And I think that probably makes her lane better and more functional overall. Now, if later in the game she's never engaging and all she does is poke with daggers, that's a different question, right? Like, that's maybe not ideal. But yeah, I think Liandry's is just kind of a strong item. Like, I think what we've been seeing with Liandry's is that everybody builds it. So like, if Katarina is building Liandry's and you're like, hey, I don't know if she should build Liandry's, you might be right, but I don't know if that's a Katarina thing. Everybody is building Liandry's right now. So if Kat's building Liandry's, my initial reaction to that would not be, oh, she shouldn't build it. Especially since it's an item that, has things like damage and health on it, which are like things she's okay with being a melee champ, right? And I would be more kind of like ask the question like, why is it that every character in the game is building Liandry's? It's possible that Liandry's is just way too strong. Do you think there's too many you deal X% more damage passives in the item system right now? You see that lethality and magic pen were the only ways? No, not necessarily. Everything has its purpose. The purpose of an item like Liandry's, you deal X% more damage passive, is to make it more about an extended combat pattern. So as an example, one way to nerf Liandry's, if it's too good, is we could say, oh, well, actually it takes 8 seconds to fully ramp up the damage increase instead of 3 or whatever it is. Like, that's an example of something that could be done there if we wanted it to be stronger in certain ways. What makes anti-shielding more unique than anti-heal? Shielding has a lot more uses as a gameplay mechanic aside from keeping people alive over time. So healing is a kind of like persistent output. It's like you have DPS and you have healing, and they kind of go hand in hand. Shielding, as an example, is a much more like gameplay relevant mechanic. In terms of like, as an example, SETT's shield. SETT's W is massive, giant, huge, but actually very, hard to use. And in that moment, it has to make him essentially invulnerable. Like, just straight up, it is not good if there are a lot of ways to counter SETT's W, because SETT's W is not designed to be countered. The shield on SETT's W is designed to make it so when he pushes that button, he doesn't die, which makes the button functional. So in a world where anti-shielding is really prevalent, things like SETT W have to be significantly stronger to ensure that that character isn't made useless by the presence of anti-shielding. And so that's kind of the deal, is like, because shields are much more relevant to certain gameplay mechanics, it's actually important in a lot of situations that you can't counter them. And so as an example, if there's lots of anti-shielding in the game, it's very possible that the designer of SETT would have, instead of giving SETT a shield on his W, just made him invulnerable when he casts the spell. Because again, the goal of that spell is not that you can like counterplay it in the moment. The counterplay to SETT's W is don't get hit by it. It's not kill SETT while he's casting it. An example of how this ended up working with Grievous Wounds is, you'll remember that when we buffed Grievous Wounds in 2019, we immediately gave Soraka Grievous Wounds removal on her ultimate. And the reason we did that is Soraka's ultimate became a non-functional spell when every game she was guaranteed to be facing 60% Grievous Wounds. And that's the problem with making these mechanics too strong and too prevalent, is you have a situation where a character like Soraka ends up being in a situation where we have to give her mechanics that counter her counter, and the end result is that buying anti-healing against Soraka doesn't beat her, it makes you go even, and you instantly lose if you don't buy it. So like, that's kind of the issue, and why we think it's fairly important that anti-shielding is not very prevalent and restricted to like very specific classes and very specific situations. What are your thoughts on duo champions and how to have their meta relevance? My main experience is XAYAH-RAKAN. You keep them near the same win rate, or do you find situations where you have 3%? Duo champions is really their relevance in regards to each other, right? The problem with XAYAH and Rakan is that we've had to balance them away from relevance with each other because of pro play. So it's kind of a thing where it's like, if we wanted to maintain them as a duo, we probably could, but it might come at costs of them being, significantly more pro viable, which, that's not necessarily the ideal thing to happen. What about having duo power skewed in a solo queue direction? I mean, we'd have to find ways to skew it in a solo queue direction. The hard part is that XAYAH and Rakan are pro skewed characters, and so when they're really good together, that starts being very worth lapping both of them up from a pro perspective, and pros are a lot better at coordinating their picks. That said, though, I do wish I wish they were closer to like Lucian and Nami, where it's like you saw one and you're like, of course I'm gonna pick the other. It's funny that the best couple in the game are both cheating on their actual spouses. Best couple is Lulu Cog. I feel like it might be Lulu Twitch. I don't know. I don't think Cog's it. I think Lulu Twitch might be the better couple, honestly. Every cute Lulu player needs her deranged Twitch main. How do we balance AD carries in terms of their specific matching supports? Well, in the case of Lucian-Nami, we like actively nerf their synergy, right? We do that to unbind them so that average players can play them, because it's not generally a great thing where it's like a Nami player feels like they can only play it with Lucian, or a Lucian player feels like he is only viable if he has a Nami on his team, right? So in terms of like hard synergies that make a character broken in the pro context, the thing we'll then have to do is find ways to like break that synergy down a bit so it's not as present.